Thanks for joining us from the Ohio AgNet Voice You Know with the News You Trust studio, sponsored by BASF, where performance of Veltima fungicide can take your best result even farther. I am Allison Kinney. Looking into the headlines today, tensions in the Middle East have raised significant concerns about the price and availability of fertilizers and fertilizer inputs in recent weeks. Joss Linville, Vice President of Fertilizer for StoneX, says a lot of fertilizer input production shut down during the fighting between Iran and Israel.
We spend a lot of time talking about the Middle East and its importance to the nitrogen marketplace globally. And this fight between Israel and Iran had a very direct relationship to the urea market. So looking at 2024 numbers, Israel was the third largest exporter in the world for urea. Well, Iran, as a precautionary measure, had to shut down their gas fields, which means you shut down nitrogen production. The flip side, Egypt was number 4 and they had to shut theirs down. A lot of people are like, well, they're far away from the fighting. Why that matter? Well, Egypt relies on Israel for their gas, so they had to shut down their nitrogen production. So when all this started to happen, and then especially when Iran started talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz, prices went crazy. We're talking 20-40% rallies in these markets.
He said prices have remained elevated.
We have, and all for different reasons. The nitrogen market, of course, it had been falling. We were finally starting to see demand quiet down. Then the attack started up, and that got everybody fired up. Even with things calming down, we're not quite sure we're going to get back down to the lows we were at. Unfortunately, in the middle of all this, India stepped up with another purchase tender looking to secure 2 million tons of urea. So that's going to give the market a lot of action to work with. Phosphate continues to struggle with the lack of Chinese exports. Normally, they're the largest exporter at 8, 9, 10 million tons a year. The government is restricting that down to 4 million tons this year if we're lucky enough to get to that point.
The higher prices are affecting the potash market too.
Even potash is significantly higher than where it was last year. Manufacturers did a masterful job of kind of framing the story out there, claiming things were tight. Demand was big, and there are certain aspects of that was true. But in the end, they got India and China to bite on higher prices, and now the rest of the world is going to have to do the same.
Producers could face some choices ahead for fall applications.
Well, unfortunately, I think there's going to be a very, very hard decision to be made in regards to the fall phosphate and potash applications. When you look at the phosphate versus the corn pricing, of course, we look at December 26th corn today because any of the phosphate bought today to be applied in the fall, spring is being used to raise next year's crop. And so we look at that relationship between the two of them. It's the highest it's ever been for this time of year. We have beaten the 2008 records that were set. You look at potash, it's on the higher side, not nearly as bad in comparison, but it's still high. And I think farmers are really going to have to sit there and look at it and decide how important is this.
Again, Josh Linville is with StoneX. Also making headlines, USDA's June acreage and grain stocks report is historically one of the most volatile pieces on the calendar, but Monday's release left the markets relatively flat. Brooks Schaefer is a market analyst with Palmetto Grain in Ridgeland, South Carolina, and says Monday's corn planting numbers provided little spark.
On the acreage side, it felt like everybody was strapped in for a bigger number on corn, and it came out almost 120,000 acres less than March intentions, which I would have expected a bigger reaction out of the market. But I think what the market's looking at is we're getting plenty of rain. So we tighten it up, we take away a little bit of a margin of error, but we haven't really threatened the balance sheet very much.
Schaefer says old crop numbers fell within range as well.
So old crop stocks, if we'd have tightened those up dramatically, maybe the market would have said, maybe we would have had more of a reaction. But since we just tightened them up a little bit, even though it was right below market expectations are right, in the range, the market didn't really react because as long as there's weather on the new crop, then we don't have anything to react to.
Somewhat surprisingly, lower ending soybean stocks didn't move the needle either.
The positive news on biofuels is on for the soybeans anyway is helping support those. So yeah, it was a little surprising to see an increase in stocks on soybeans from expectations. But the new crop acres were a little bit less. So, that probably offsets. It's August weather that makes beans. So beans have a little more weather ahead to trade. So they aren't going to press them to the downside right now yet.
Palmetto Grain market analyst Brooks Schaefer.
Here's farmer and landowner John Prue.
We purchased the land about 3 years ago, and there was an old farmstead on there with trees. We were going to clear the land so we could farm through it. We thought we knew where the pipe was, so we didn't call to get it located. The work on our property led to the damage of a light crude pipeline. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but it could have been much worse.
Never assume the location or depth of underground lines. Always call 811 or visit clickbeforeyoudig.com before you start work. A message from the Pipeline Operators for Ag Safety campaign.
This market report is brought to you by Seed Consultants. Simply better performance online at seedconsultants.com. July corn down 1/2 at $5.20. December corn down 3 1/2 at $4.22. July soybeans up 1/2 at $10.24 3/4. November soybeans up 1/4 at $10.27 1/4. July wheat up 8 1/2 at $5.37 1/4. September wheat up 10 3/4 at $5.49. August live cattle down 3.12 at $210.75. October live cattle down 237 at $207.80. July lean hogs down 110 at $109, and August lean hogs down 55 cents at $106.95. This is the Ohio AgNet.